the thing that we fear the most, where we experience the most resistance, is often the place where we have our highest calling. Right. And so that's the place where if we are able to push through being uncomfortable, being scared, being afraid to start the thing, or right, like all of us starting businesses, it's like that can be one of the most scary things ever when you're leaving your first job. But you have this greater calling and this greater purpose, but there's always something standing in the way of that. And I think the more intense the fear is, it's often really linked to what we're most called to do.
Welcome back to another episode of The Pursuit of Purpose. My name is Chris Kiefer, and today I am joined by Jordan Loftus, who is the founder and CEO of Story Chorus. And he is a ghostwriter, a speaker, expert in helping entrepreneurs write books and publish books. And today we are going to be talking about the topic of the purpose behind fear and how the story that you believe about yourself becomes your reality. So first of all, I'm also joined by my coworker, Nathan. And Nathan and Jordan go way back, all the way back to babysitting of some sort. So that sounds like an interesting story.
Misinformation.
Guys, yeah, thank you guys so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to be here.
You or just because there's always nice to have some chit chat, and the listeners don't always get to hear the backstory of what I do, what Nathan and I do. But you were just commenting on the ridiculously specific niche that we have, which is painting companies. And I'm actually impressed that you've done even more research to know the size of painting companies and all that. So you probably know more about us than our clients do, because I don't even know how many of our clients have read our website.
Well, it doesn't take much if you just read the headline. I was really surprised though, being able to see something so specific: automation for painting companies scaling from 4 million to 15 million. And I thought, man, there are very specific people raising their hands saying, I want to do that. And then I love how you guys automate reviews as well. It's just brilliant.
Yeah.
I don't work with a ton of painters, but I understand the service business, and what you guys have to offer for that specific of a niche is just brilliant.
Yeah. And I always like to clarify that I did not wake up and decide, which actually in my previous attempt at entrepreneurship in the marketing world, I did arbitrarily wake up and said, I want to go after dentists. And I just tried to market towards dentists. In this case, because there's that, the niches get the riches, or the niche, the niche, like the money is in the niche, depending on how you want to pronounce
how
that
fancy
word.
You are.
Riches are in the niches.
Exactly. In this case, I worked in painting for 3 years, and I was just giving away and trying to network with other marketing people that were trying to automate things. And it was after telling 5 or 6 other marketing directors around the country, oh yeah, I just watched this YouTube video and did this tutorial. It was super easy. And people start coming back to you and they're like, it didn't work for me. And that was the first time in my life that I was like, oh, I might actually have a skill set that is unique, because it was so easy for me. And the way I think about stuff in engineering mind was just oh yeah, logically you do that and connect this. And it was just ridiculously hard for other people. And so after enough people asked me, I was like, maybe I could do this. And I genuinely thought that painting in general was going to last 6 months, and then I was going to be out of a job and have to go to HVAC or plumbers or something. And it's been the opposite, where at first I was like, any painting company. And then it's got more and more narrow to where we're there are large contracts that we engage with that take 6 months to implement, and because we're revamping a business's entire process,
Yeah.
And yeah, so now it's exactly like what you said. That's why we put it on our website. If you're under 4 million, we might be able to help you, but if you're not trying to scale, it's probably not worth the investment. But if you're 2 million, 3 million, and you're no, I want to be a $10 million company, it's we could literally change your business in 60 days, like night and day, save you hundreds of thousands of dollars every single month. Like, it's a ridiculous niche that we're in. It's bizarre to me how it just keeps getting, like with AI, it just keeps adding more and more possibility and opportunity. And someone's got to solve the problem. And it's a really hard problem to solve one time. But if you're going to solve it for 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 painting companies, now there's a little opportunity there, you know?
I love that too, because you talked about something that I run into all the time working with entrepreneurs. It's like you end up having this gift that's so second nature to you that you don't even like, you're like, what's so magic about this? Right? Like, you're so good at something so naturally, but it's magic. Like, to the rest of us, it's like you're waving a magic wand, making these things happen. And then you're able to take that and like very surgically help businesses with the hardest thing, which is scaling. I mean, that's the absolute hardest thing. And it makes sense too that you're looking at that market size, because you have to be a business that already has, like, you can't start scaling without processes in place and that kind of thing. Like, you can't just push software. I learned this the hard way. You can't just push software in and be like, that's going to scale me. It's like, well, no, that actually makes everything worse, because now you don't even know how to use the software and you're just scaling chaos and all that. So, like,
Man,
just
this is crazy. You're literally, Nathan, how many times have we talked about
I
this?
literally say that to every person I talk to.
really okay. Well, it just no, I just
Software
think
is
it's
not going to
brilliant.
scale your business. You need processes and you need people, but if you have those things, like we can make your life feel magical if you have those things, and then we apply software. Now we can go to the moon. But like,
Yeah, it's like you remove that death by 1,000 paper cuts kind of thing with automation. That's super, super cool. So anyway, I
And
like,
there you go. But you have to be getting cut by paper first.
there
If
has
you
to be
get, if you
paper to
get,
cut you.
if you
Not
get
had-
one paper cut
Yeah.
or 10 paper cuts, it hurts, but you're not about to like change your life to have it stop happening. But yes, when you're approaching 500 paper cuts a week, you might want to change something.
Right. The Band-Aid budget gets out of control.
That's right. That's going to sink you.
Yeah,
Band-Aids.
exactly.
So and that's one of the things that, like, I've been talking to a number of people that help with writing books, because that's one of the things that I have noticed and seen is that one of the successes in growing this business was essentially the result of, for about 9 months straight, at least 3 to 4 times a week, I was posting YouTube videos on tutorials on like connecting and automating different softwares that I knew painters used. And speaking of niche, I told everybody that I know, like, I'm pretty sure if there is an award at YouTube for the most niche YouTube channel, I think I should be in the top 10 at least in the world, because I have 3,000 subscribers, or actually I think it's at 4,000 subscribers now. But there's like, I don't know, 200 and something videos that I've posted, and it, like, that only 4,000 subscribers is a ridiculous amount of leads that come from that, because it's like first of all, nobody's subscribing to that channel unless you're a painter.
Right.
And if you're a painter, if you're wanting to scale, you're like the perfect candidate for us. So that was like one thing of like, ooh, you start posting content and posting ideas out there in the world. YouTube is one, but books is another thing. And so writing books is something that I'm like, I want to write a book. I've had the idea, like, I'm going to write a book, but the process of doing that, like, I'm an engineer, I'm a nerd. I know I have a whole bunch of thoughts. This is actually one of the things that Nathan's been lovingly getting frustrated about in our business right now, is that there's all this stuff that I intuitively do know, say, and just come up with on the fly. And it's like, how do I take that and turn it into SOPs and document the ideas, or turn them into frameworks that I can publish in books for both our clients, but also our team. So that's something that, just framing everything else that we talk about, that's a big issue for me right now, or like opportunity, I would say, that I'm like aware of. And I just need to find the time and the right people to help solve that problem.
You know, it's a super common problem, right? You started something because you have ideas, and you still have clients because you still have more and better ideas, and you can improve things and optimize things. And so when you're a fountain of ideas, especially if you're collaborative like that, if a lot of them come out, and this is for anybody listening, but if a lot of your ideas come out, like when you're processing things or talking with your team, or, you know, doing anything like that, where you're processing out loud, the number one thing you can do is just capture. Just make sure you're recording. Like, it's the simplest part of it all is just record it. Just record your meetings, record your riffs, go on a walk and pretend you're talking on the phone, and just verbalize things and talk out loud, because it's so easy now. With, speaking of technology, it's so easy to get great transcriptions. And with the advent of AI, it's so easy to be able to take those ideas and kind of cut through the ums and uhs and everything like that, and find, like, what is the structure, right? What is the way that I want to communicate this? And while AI isn't, you don't want to write your book with AI. Just trust me on that. People do that, and it's really obvious, and it fails. But it can help you. Those are the kinds of frictions, though, that software can even enter into your workflow as a creator. And it's just capturing whenever you're in ideation, whenever you're the most creative, or you're coming up with the most novel solutions, or things where people are like, man, you need to write that down. It's like, just capture it, and then process it, and then you can do whatever you want with, you know, your league of Google Docs, or have your assistant do it, or something like that. But that's just one teeny little thing you can do that could make all the difference.
Nathan,
Yo.
what are you thinking? Just giving the floor to you for a minute.
Oh, just riff. We're riffing on that.
Or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited for. I don't know. I feel like I want to get more into AI. Of like, I want to be able to talk at it for an hour or 30 minutes or whatever, and then like, okay, now make this structured for me. Or
Yeah.
like, hey, I have a team and I need to train them, and here's 30 minutes of me monologuing. Like, can you give this to me in a structured format that I can then communicate well to my team? You know?
So that's a perfect use case. I use AI a ton, but not in the way people would probably presume a ghostwriter uses AI. So I'm just like a huge nerd and just into it. You know, it's invaded every corner of my life because it's just fun. And I'm just getting, and I still say thank you to Chat GPT just in case it takes over, right? But what you're talking about is exactly what AI is super good at doing. And even for SOPs, you know, with your company or with anything like that, think about all of your words as just pieces of data. That's what a transcript is it's a chunk of multiple pieces of data that you can then have your AI buddy organize and restructure and make really applicable for this kind of a person, right? So you know the person you want to communicate to, and you know what you're trying to help them do, and then you just talk at it, and it takes all of the, you know, the 40 laps around Mount Sinai that it took you to like describe the thing, and it just makes it super streamlined and easy. And so that's you talking. It can completely take that and turn it into gold.
Yeah. I've actually I have used it, and I think this is one of the, well, I'm obviously viewing it from my perspective and who I am and my skill sets, but me, like AI, the gift that AI was to me was that I'm not a coder, or like I understand I can kind of like decipher code, but I'm not someone that just like sits down and writes JavaScript. But I think extremely like sequentially, and I'm
You
able
think
to
like an
take
engineer.
I'm able to take a concept and be like, okay, so it needs to go here and search that database and look for this criteria, and then come back. And so I can, I have multiple times I'll put on the Apple voice to text, and then turn on ChatGPT, and then just basically be like, I need help creating this script in Airtable to do this, which is going to go look this up. And I just ramble. And it's like, when you look at it, I used to like, you know this, but other people, they get so paranoid about punctuation and everything. And so now what I do is I try to not look at the transcript because it doesn't get the words right. And you just kind of have to ignore it. So I'll just like record and then start going for like 5 minutes and be like, oh, and I need to do this. And then be like, before you try to solve this, tell me what problem am I trying to solve and what's really going on, and then ask me any clarifying questions to get clear
That's
on what
great.
you actually need to do. And that's like, oh my gosh, that's like a month of work that it would have had like 3 years ago to try to literally get what it can do by you dialoguing for 10 minutes. And then I answer its follow-up questions, and then it's like, write the script, and then it just spits out JavaScript, and then I can go through and be like, that doesn't really make sense, or like, hey, can you explain what's going on in line 72? Like stuff like that is just, it's crazy because now I feel like I have the ideas, and me trying to explain that idea to a developer 5 years ago, talk about the most expensive conversation that goes nowhere. Like,
For
that's
real.
not going to happen. So
Well, and it's funny because you guys do that for companies. I mean, you're basically the AI bot who's like plugging into, hey, we want to do all these things. We're not sure how it happens. And you're like, oh, that's okay. We get that. We see how it connects. Like you just talk, we'll make it happen. It's a pretty cool parallel because I think that's the magic of it, of anything, right? Anytime you're in business, it's like if you can make it feel like a magical experience where something just happens and your customer is like, wow, I don't even know how you just did that, but the results happen. They want to talk about it. They want to, and I don't know how to, describe that with painters per se, but like with anything, I suppose it's like, if you can
No,
make it feel like magic,
yeah.
it's over.
I feel like in the sales process, when I'm like the most successful, I just get people talking about what they want,
Mm,
and I like really get them going. And I don't like fill in. I'm like, yeah, and then you can do this and this and this. It's like, oh no, like tell me more about that. Have you ever thought about, what about reporting in your business? How's that going? And they're like, oh my gosh, like,
right.
then it's like, what do you want your reporting to be like? Oh, this other guy who blah, blah, blah. And then they just get going and they're like, wait a second, can you do that? You're like, yeah,
You just described what we do. Yeah.
yeah,
yeah, that's what we do.
exactly.
And those are the sales when they're like, okay, give me the price. When do I start? How long does it take? Like, let's do this. When they just, they paint this picture of magic, what they want. And you're like, yeah, I can do that. I'm the
Well,
magician. I got it.
and I think one of the most interesting things you can even, like, when you take away the sales word and you're just literally a person showing up to help, like it's cliche, but like when you really show up and you're like, okay, can I want something for someone more than I want something from them, and like being able to come with that
Mm.
mindset. And then you're also adding this huge value because most of us can't even articulate our problems fully. We've never been able to articulate it. We've never been able to find the language to say, well, this is what I need. And so even then in the conversation, you're helping someone like finally crystallize and see like, oh, this is what I need. And then you're like, yeah, you're describing what we do. But even that's a gift, because how many times have you found it like you couldn't even, in inexperience or ignorance or whatever, because you just didn't know something existed. Like you couldn't even describe the solution you needed or wanted because you didn't even really know the problem deep at heart. And so I think that's even something that's like a gift to people when you just help them get clear, because clarity is the ultimate motivation.
Clarity is the ultimate motivation.
Wow. That might be a podcast episode title.
T-shirts, guys.
I think.
Can we T-shirt that?
T-shirts.
So the other thing I want to hear more about, uh, purpose is found behind your greatest fear. Is that what you said?
I don't remember exactly how I put it,
It was
but
so good.
Yeah,
but
you said purpose hides behind fear. And then I think it was
The story you
slash
believe
the
about
story you believe
yourself
about yourself
becomes
becomes reality.
reality.
Yeah. So I think for all of us, the thing that we fear the most, where we experience the most resistance, is often the place where we have our highest calling. Right. And so that's the place where if we are able to push through being uncomfortable, being scared, being afraid to start the thing, or right, like all of us starting businesses, it's like that can be one of the most scary things ever, when you're leaving your first job. But you have this greater calling and this greater purpose, but there's always something standing in the way of that. And I think the more intense the fear is, it's often really linked to what we're most um, called to do. And I say that because I've gotten to work on over 100 books now in the last 10 years, and I've ghostwritten over 70 myself. And the parallel here is all of the authors I worked with, they're leaders of some capacity. So most of them are entrepreneurs. And so what I get to do is I get to go sit with, you know, CEOs or chairmen of like literally $6 billion companies and sit down. And I get to ask them any question I want. And so it's a pretty good gig. I get a mentor every time I do a book. But what I've seen is every single person ends up having these insane fears that even you'd think, man, you're standing on $1 billion empire, but you're still afraid of how people are going to perceive you, right? You're still afraid of what people are going to think, or you're still afraid of whatever it is. So I found like no matter what the level of success is, it seems like the lid on the next level was always fear. And it was oftentimes a construct. It wasn't even real because, right, how many times have we played a tough argument or a tough conversation we think we're going to have, and we've played it through in our minds and we tortured ourselves, and then we have the conversation and it goes nothing like we imagined. Like that's just a little teeny example of like I think what happens in real life when you find out like, oh, if I would have said no to this thing because I'm afraid, my life would look the same as it did, or maybe even worse because of the trajectory I was headed down. And so I think that's why our you know purpose hides behind our biggest fears, is because the thing we're called to do is the thing we've experienced the most resistance against.
I've heard another right in line with that. Another idea is like your purpose in life is right beside the worst thing that's ever happened to you. Which I think I guess I would say oftentimes the worst thing that's ever happened to you is probably something that you're afraid could happen again, which is back to fear.
I every single entrepreneur, owner, founder, whatever that I've worked with has experienced some sort of traumatic event, right? There's some sort of really difficult thing that happened to them, even when they were young, or when they were young in their career or whatever. Like my first traumatic event in business was started my first startup and with some friends that Nathan, and it went really well until it didn't. And I never saw it coming, right? And so I thought I was so good at business. And then all of a sudden we had no pipeline. Our leads had totally dried up, and I was so focused on what I wanted to make instead of what our clients actually wanted, that we just hit this cliff. And then there was like no safety net, so all of a sudden we're not paying ourselves. My wife is pregnant with our first kid. We're going into credit card debt because I had been working at a ministry before that. And I think when I first started that ministry, I was making like $600 a month, just able to make rent in our 420 square foot apartment. And so it was like those kind of things. So we entered that, the bottom falls out of our finances, our businesses on the rocks. And then my wife gets sick in the hospital. We have all these medical bills that are piling up, and I don't even have a job. We got acquired by this company, but they were acquiring us because of my partner. because he was a brilliant developer. And so I was just kind of like the ugly girl at the dance who got in with her cute friend, is what I felt like. But it was the exact thing that I feared, because I grew up without having, hardly any money. My mom and dad are church planters, so they're pastors. And I remember as a kid, like, I remember our electricity getting shut off. I remember guys coming and like turning our water off. I remember having to take a shower in like a cold bucket, like just all these different things. So I was always really scared of what would happen if we risked and the finances weren't there. And then all of a sudden, like, my greatest fear was realized. So then fast forward to starting Story Chorus 6 years ago, I was like, no, there's no way I'm starting this company. I am so bad at business. I'm just going to fail, and we're not going to have any money, and our water's going to get turned off. Right. And so that's what I meant though, too, by like the story you believe about yourself becomes reality, because the script that we're writing, the things that we believe and internalize, that colors our choices, what we think is possible and not possible. So we start governing ourselves essentially, and we get results that are so far below what we'd hope we could get because we didn't believe that they were possible, right? So we were in that exact place where I was like, no, everything's going to be a failure because that happened before, and what I'm afraid of since I was a kid is going to happen again. And it reminds me of this saying, like, you don't have business problems, you have personal problems that show up in your business. And that I just learned that in that time of my life more than ever. Like, it wasn't about clients, it wasn't about anything except for like what was in between my ears and the personal issues I had surrounding it.
Yeah, I think half or more of the battle is like knowing what are you afraid of. Like, and it's one thing that you had to clearly identify. I'm afraid of running out of money, right? And it's like when you're aware of it, clarity creates motivation of like, okay, I'm afraid of running out of money. Now I can maybe face that a little bit more head on, right? Like look at it a little bit objectively and like handle it. I think what drives a lot of people is their fears that they don't even know they have. So
Mm.
this is coming to mind because I was meeting with my coach, Jonathan, Chris, and we did this practice, and he was like, we were trying to identify like the beliefs about myself that were like kind of driving me. And so he had me go through this practice of like, I am, and he had me say, I am that I am. And then it was like a negative kind of belief about myself. And the idea was like, I am like, I am not that thing, but I am believing that thing. So I am that thing.
Right. It's like this self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes. So as
Yeah.
I am that I am, like lazy, right? And I like went back to this like little 7-year-old boy of me, and my older siblings came home from college, and I was like playing video games all day, and they're like, "Dude, you're lazy." You know? Like I go back to that moment of like this thing and this belief that's still a part of me, and it's like, that thing is driving me still to to this day. Like, not that like I'm not going to be lazy, but then
Mm-hmm.
now I'm like building on top of this thing that's like like it's toxic, I'm not building on like I'm a hard worker and I have vision and I have passion and motivation, I'm going to go change the world. Right? You can build a lot of successful things that will last on that belief, but I'm building on I'm afraid people are going to think I'm lazy, so I'm going to at least look like I'm working hard, you know? And anyway, there we kept going, and there was like 30 of these things that he's like,
Gosh.
okay, what else is in there? What else is in there? What else is in there? And it was brutal, but it was like at the end of it, it was like I have this list of like, okay, this is what I have to face, you know?
That's good.
That's so good. And like, it's really like the identity word, right? Everything goes back to our identity. and you start building. The laziness thing is funny too, because I remember like playing video games or, you know, watching TV or whatever. But then when my dad would come home, I would like shut the TV off and start cleaning or do something to try to make it look like I was working. Right. And so there's that, you know, that fundamental belief about yourself. And then you start building a life on that. And then what it turned to is like 80 to 100 hours of working, you know, just getting such minimal returns on the amount of time you're investing in something, all while, you know, we had these little twins and then another daughter, and it's just like, then you start sacrificing all of this stuff with your family. It's like, you know, it's like all the cliches apply, but it's like all because you're working from that foundation of I am a lazy person, and so that's my personal hell, and I must make sure that that's not true. And so I have to prove it to myself and prove it to everybody else, and then if it gets validated that that's not true, then I'll be okay. And it's like, and then you talk about, I have 30 of these things, you're right, and then it's just like, how far down does that rabbit hole go until you are able to come to this place of identity? And working with authors, that's really the core of everybody's story. I work with a lot of like founder stories. Like, how did you build this thing? Right? That's the question we all have, is like, how did you build this massive thing? Like, where did you come from? What decisions did you make? What's your mindset on it? Right? You want to know all those things, but like really it comes from these, you see success happen and then be sustained through this ability to let your identity evolve, or at least come to peace with the fact that like what you believed about yourself were lies, and leave those behind, because otherwise like those things just keep showing up and eroding everything you built, and it sort of feels like sand, you know, falling through your fingers.
Yeah, don't think about a pink elephant.
Yeah.
Which you resist.
Have you, it reminds me of, well, there's a couple things there. There's an exercise that I learned from Tim Ferriss years ago called fear setting. Have either of you guys heard of that?
No.
So like goal setting, right? But fear setting. And the way it works is you define the worst case scenario. So it's like a grid or like 3 columns. So the first column, you just list out what are your fears, and it could be like running out of money, or that my wife's going to leave me, or that I'm going to be a terrible dad, or whatever those things are. Maybe it's my business is going to fail, or we're not going to have enough. It could be something immediate, like we're not going to be able to make payroll, or I can't afford to pay my rent, or whatever it is. Then you, on the second column, for each fear, so you break down for the first one, what are all those things I could do to prevent that from happening? So like I defined it, and then it's like, okay, I could, make an emergency fund. I could, whatever, just literally just brainstorm as many things as you could to prevent that from happening. And then it's like the third column is, okay, it did happen. Even though like I'm afraid of it, I tried to prevent it, it still happened. What could I do to repair or get back to the current state that I'm at? And then you brainstorm a third column of like, okay, I could do this, or we could move into an apartment, or whatever the thing is, and we get back on our feet. I could start working at Domino's, whatever this stuff is. But by doing that, similarly, I feel like there's threads of what you guys are describing is you can define, as soon as you know it, that's the first like step. And like the exercise that Jonathan took you through is like a great way to try to really hone in on what are the fears. But then the idea of like, you do that, those other 2 columns, and you get done, and you're like, oh, that's it. Okay. Like I all of a sudden you've like, crystallized it, and you're looking at it, and you're like, okay, this is like it's way scarier. It's like if you guys know about Jaws, that Steven Spielberg was like invested, I think it was like a huge chunk of his budget on trying to make this epic mechanical shark that they were going to show, and it just was terrible. And they're like, well, we can't show that. And the fact that they didn't show it made it so much more scary, because you never see the shark. You see a fin, and then it's just like terror, and it's just letting everyone's imagination run rampant on how scary and awful this thing is. And had they ever shown the shark, the movie would have been, you know, half as good as it is, because you're like, it's like, oh, that looks like the worst CGI ever, you know?
Right. Straight to home video. We would have been
Exactly.
ordering that on an infomercial.
That's right. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's really good. And no matter no matter what level of success, it's just always blown my mind that like there's always there's always fear and there's always insecurity, and it seems like that's always sort of this trail sign, like this marker for, okay, now this is what you need to press into. Like this is where you need to go next. And then that's where, you know, whatever you want to call it, the next level, or, you know, the next big break or whatever, like that's where it ends up being, is on the other side of that fear.
So then what do you do? Like, what you believe about yourself becomes your reality. I would assume that it would be wise to believe good things about yourself.
Yeah, and for me, I've never been like an affirmations guy or anything like that, like just saying things, and there's a lot of people who are, and so I don't, you know, it just never felt like authentic for me to like start saying these things, because like internally it's like, well, I didn't really believe it. Like I didn't really believe the things I was supposed to be saying over myself, right? So it's like I don't know. It just never stuck for me. But what I finally started doing is getting down to the core of like, well, what actually is true, you know? And I'm a Christian, so like that's my worldview. And so I went to this story. There's this really cool story in the Bible where there's this guy named Daniel, and he's having the worst day. Like he's having the absolute worst day. It's been an awful like 3 weeks. He's been super depressed. He's terrified. People are going to get taken into captivity. Like there's just all these different things that are happening in his life and in his world that are the worst things like you can imagine. And God sends this angel to him, and Daniel's about to get all of these crazy like answers to what should happen next, right? And it's this really big moment. And so you'd think that an angel would be showing up and being like, okay, bro, like you better rise up to the occasion. Like there's a lot of people who need to hear what I'm about to tell you. But instead, the angel shows up and says, Daniel, oh man, greatly loved. And that's the first thing he says to him, is like, you are greatly loved. And that was his foundational identity. It wasn't, you need to step up and make sure that you save the world. It was like, well, no, you can do that because you're coming from this place of like ultimate security. And so whatever that is for your worldview, or, you know, for your life, like not everybody believes like me, but that's what I had to go back to, is like, well, what's my foundational, like in my head, unequivocally true that I can't argue with? It's like, oh, well, that I am loved and I am accepted and I have a place no matter what. And so from that, like so much insecurity starts to fall off. And suddenly, and just practically, what that did for me is it made me, this is just one little thing, but it made me stop being afraid of asking dumb questions. And you might think like, well, that's like, okay, great, Jordan. Wow, I'm glad you changed your life like that. But that unlocked something crazy for me, as I stopped being afraid to look stupid. And I just got clarity, and I just asked these questions, and that would lead in my, you know, author interviews to these massive breakthroughs, or it allowed me to start things and try things and do things publicly. Even if they failed, I was like, whatever, because I'm not getting my worth from views or likes or, you know, dollars or anything like that. And so suddenly, like, what you believe about yourself starts to become reality. And if you start from this place where you're like, I am secure, I don't have to earn it or prove it to anybody, then you can get this, like all that mental block clear. And then you can just ask the fundamental question of business. okay, how do I add the right value to the right people at the right time? And if I can do that over and over and over again, I'm going to have clients. I'm going to have a great business. We're going to keep growing, and we can keep focusing on adding the right value to the right people at the right time. But like for me, it literally came from that fundamental identity shift of like re-seeing who I am and then being able to show up differently.
Mm. I mean, I would say I feel like you even mentioned some of the business people that you talk to. That's a, I mean, Nathan, I think I told you this, but someone, they're very similar to what you're saying about the fear that basically someone, I don't remember where I heard this, but whatever the thing is that you're afraid of, that's the thing you need to tackle as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is for me, if you guys want to share, you're welcome to, because mine are kind of silly. But when I would think about that, like obviously there's like bears or whatever, like things that fire, that you could actually get hurt by. And for whatever reason, the two things that I'm most freaked out by is karaoke and stand up comedy. Like those two things that I'm like, literally, I just squirm. Like someone's like, let's go to a karaoke bar. I'm like, nope, not doing that. Uh, not like I just am so terrified by that thing, which is really interesting because I also love comedy and I have done stand up in high school. I dabbled in it. And now I'm like, those two things are like kind of absurd, but I'm like, I have to go do those. I have to tackle that. And it's like, why? What am I don't know. But I would say it's probably coming back to fear of what other people think of me.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I don't, it's not a mystery. I do know like middle school trauma and Chris getting bullied and like made fun of for, a variety of things. And it's still like, that's how it shows up as an adult, is like in these scenarios where someone's going to laugh because I can't sing or whatever. You know what I mean?
And I'm a musician and just have gigged a ton and done all that kind of stuff. My brother's actually a stand-up comedian. And so like the whole idea around performing, it's so funny too. Like the rule really is if you're having fun, they'll have fun. And so like the ability to just have fun, be at ease with yourself and be at ease with the situation, like it totally deflates the fear balloon because you can just roll with whatever's going to happen and you can laugh with people or you can mess up with your instrument and it's ends up being just fine because they don't even really know that you messed up. They just think you're playing jazz. They have no idea. And so I think that's the thing is like if you can be at ease with yourself in any situation and like you really diffuse the tension and the fear and you can make really magical moments happen because like now all the processing power in your brain isn't being obsessed with I hope this thing doesn't happen, and it's just like there in the moment and it's present. And people with a fear of speaking, it's so much the same thing. It's like the reason why we're paralyzed by those things is because we're just being hyper obsessed with ourselves. And so the second we can like let go of ourselves, that's when the magic can happen.
Mm. Awesome. Any closing thoughts, Nathan?
This is great. I love this. I'm having fun. I don't care if it ever gets posted or whatever. Like, I don't know. Did
Is
we
it
push the
good? I mean,
pause? I don't
honestly,
know.
I feel like, wow,
This
that
is
was a
fun.
fast hour. No, I'm or I guess I should say to you, Jordan, we have a few wrap up questions. So books, movie, and contact. But is there any, I always ask people when you are heading into a conversation, at least for me, there's always something that's on my mind or like, oh, I'm probably going to talk about whatever. So is there anything that you came to this with like preconceived, like something that is either relevant in the day to day for you right now, or just like your thing that you're really obsessed with that you want to like have be the last topic?
my life's purpose has really been wrapped around helping people tell their stories. And what I've learned for anybody is that your story is your greatest competitive advantage. And so the better you get at telling your story and including other people like inside of that story, you will, the science is in, you'll become 100% more memorable to people by telling a story. The way that you actually create a cascade of chemicals in brains when you tell a story that's engaging, like it just, what stories are able to do from sales all the way to just like life satisfaction is incredible and scientifically proven. And so if you haven't, like, really lean into what is our story, because everybody's got like a fingerprint, everybody's got a story print. And so that's what your greatest competitive advantage, because there's differentiation. Nobody has your exact story. They might paint, they might run automation, they might write books, they might do whatever, but they're not you. And unless you capitalize on that thing, like you're losing so much opportunity to be remembered, be top of mind, and be trusted. And we know that people buy from people they know, like, and trust. And stories are exceptional vehicles for doing that. So don't sleep on your story.
Tell me. So I'm very intrigued by that. And I mean, I agree with it, but I'm like, okay, can you make that a little bit more tangible when you're like, it's your most competitive advantage? Like, okay, is that like, to me, I'm like, well, how far back do you want me to go? Or is it like, or because it's not about length necessarily, but is it, are you saying identify the key moments in your life, or like, what's like the, how, take me a couple steps down that path?
Yeah, so I have 5 story scripts that I take everybody through. And they're essentially how to cut out the boring parts and how to get really good at just telling the most important part of your story. So one of the foundational scripts with entrepreneurs is your founder story. And so it's looking at that specific story of how you went from where you were to where you are now, what problem you solve, and the real conflict that was between you and the help that you provide to people. And so, like, your startup story or your founder story is so excellent at being able to help people understand you, understand where you came from, and understand how you help them in a very permanent way, in a very tangible way. And you can tell it in 30 seconds, or you can tell it in a keynote, or you can tell it on a podcast, right? So like it's like an accordion. Nobody likes
Mm-hmm.
the instrument, but it's a really good analogy. Like, it can expand or contract to the space that you have. And so I think there's 3 big stories you need to tell. Is like, one, your founder story. So how did you start the thing and why does it matter? And then your company's story, like from a brand perspective, like how you are, because your company's brand is different than your personal brand, right? So then tell the story about who your company is, what you're for, what is your unfair advantage, those kind of things. And then the third story, I call them show and sell scripts. And so they're just really great ways to be able to download to, like, if you have a sales team, being able to say, well, these are like these mini case studies. Basically, like, here's all the objections. So let's map out all the objections people have in your buying process. And then let's attach a success story to every single one of those, because people also remember stories. So your people can tell stories a lot more easily than they can memorize scripts. And you can do it yourself too. And so then, right when you hear the keyword, the objective or the objection, well, boom, then I know I've got that story of XYZ. And that story is going to solve the objection and move them beyond it and answer that question in a way that's like such much more powerful and meaningful. So I think if you can tell those stories, if you can tell your story, if you can tell your company's story, and then if you can tell these show and sell scripts where you're like, this is our this is what people all have problems with, but I've got a story and they can be short and succinct for every single one of those, you're going to win.
So I went on a journey in my head from when you started talking about that to the end here, and you can tell me if I'm wrong or if I'm picking it up. Like, it's not the fact that you have a story that's your competitive advantage, or even that like it's a good one. It's the competitive advantage. What I hear you saying is like being able to tell your story in a compelling way, like, and being able to bring people into yourself, into your moments, into your past, into your why, into your reason, into your life experience, like being able to the skill of telling your story is the competitive advantage.
Yeah, exactly. And it's actually like the way to approach it is it sounds like, okay, how do I tell my story? But what you actually ask first is, well, what do they care about? What are the people that I'm trying to communicate to? Like, what do they care about? What are their problems? What are their fears? What are their obstacles? What's their pain now? What's their like promised land where they'd love to be in the future? And I have all these tools where you can go deep on that. And then what you do is you contour your story to your audience and the setting. And so if you're on a podcast, it's going to be different than if you're like, in a one-to-one, you're doing a lunch with someone or whatever. But it's just having the bones of the thing that maps to the person that you're trying to reach. Because then what you're doing is you're actually letting them play their own story in their mind as you're telling yours, because that's how our brains work. We see ourselves in stories. That's why we like movies and all that kind of stuff. And so it's actually like this real psychological kind of hack in communicating with people. And you just do it from a place that's not me centric. It's about them. And then you're showing up to offer all the good, interesting, helpful bits.
Love it. Speaking of stories, what are your 3 book recommendations for us? And this is not necessarily, doesn't have to be on the topics that we've been discussing, but it could be your top 3, the ones you give away the most, the last 3 you read, first 3 you read, if you remember that far back. But anyways, yeah, 3 book recommendations.
The War of Art, I love, by Stephen Pressfield, with Resistance. I send that little book out. So, like, I've sent so many copies of that out because it addresses everything we're talking about, only way better than I could. Um, and and I love a book. Oh, it's by Chip and Dan Heath. It's called Made to Stick. So if you're looking at stories, like the way that they break communication down and why certain things stick with people, and like this 6-part framework for how to tell stories that stick, it works so well. And it's fascinating too, because it helps you understand why, like, we all know the story of someone waking up in, a tub of ice and their kidneys gone, like that old, like, rumor, like that. There's a reason why that spread like wildfire, even though it's not actually true. Like, that never really happened to people, but we were all like scared of it as kids. And so there's just all that kind of stuff. So that book. And then I really like recommending at least one fiction book. And I'd say if you haven't read Dune is a place to get. It's a great thinker, political, just all the kind of stuff you want your mind to be milling around on. It's great.
I have not read the book, but I've seen both movies. You probably know from reading the book. Am I correct that there's the Dune part? It's one book, but they are making 3 movies out of it. They've made 2, and there's a third one. That's all correct, or is there multiple Dune books also?
So there's 4 Dune books. I would just read the first one because the rest of them get real weird. But the first one's enough. And I don't know exactly where they're going with the movies, but it's a
Okay,
super gratifying read.
that's awesome. Movie suggestion, and only thing I always say about this is I don't have a ton of time to watch movies, but this is why I asked the question. I don't need like Dune, right? It was a great movie, or The Dark Knight. I love getting the suggestion of the sleeper hits that maybe I haven't seen, but like, oh, you know what? Really unpopular movie that was an awesome one is. So a little bit of pressure. What's your movie suggestion for us?
Okay, mine it's not short because it's a series, but I think Severance. If you haven't seen Severance, I think it's on Apple TV. It is the greatest philosophical piece about our relationship with our work and what that does to us as humans. It is absolutely brilliant and makes you think about your whole life and your relationship to your work, which as entrepreneurs is extremely valuable. So, and I think the second season's coming out soon, but it is well worth the time.
How many episodes is it?
I think it's 8.
It's so funny how you judge, like the covers are so critical. And I've seen the Severance thing, like the cover photo with like a balloon head or something like that. And I've always been like, that looks so weird. But no one's ever told me that, like, yeah, it's good. So I'm adding it to the watch list.
It's basically about like how we become alienated from our work and our meaning in life, how our work can divorce us from actually living. And if you want to know the philosophical underpinnings, I was a philosophy major. It actually goes all the way back to a bunch of old books, and I won't tell you about it, but a bunch of Germans who were writing philosophy, and now it's made in a show that's super compelling and makes you think along all these really important lines without actually having to bore you like I would.
Awesome. Well, Jordan, this was, super fun. I'm like, these topics, I feel like I would talk all day. It's like the podcasting for me, this is like the dessert of my week. So thank you so much for ending the Friday on a strong note for me. And Nathan, thank you for hanging out and asking good questions and contributing. But yeah, if someone wants to get in touch with you, how would you recommend that they do that? What's your preference?
So you can find me on Instagram, Loftis Writes. So Loftis and then writes, like a writer. Or you can visit our website, Story Chorus, CHORUS, like a choir, storychorus.com. And yeah, I'd be happy to help and talk story and hopefully leave you with ears because I could talk about it forever.
Love it. Well, thank you so much. And we will see all of you on the next episode.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you so much for listening. My name is Chris Kiefer, and my mission is to champion the relentless pursuit of purpose. And what that means to me is to be an example, a champion, someone that is in the trenches, working and showing and winning and trying and failing in how to pursue a deeper and more meaningful life with the people that I love, with my kids, with my friends, with our family, and also just be a champion and example of entrepreneurship and following my passion and doing what I believe I'm called to on this earth. And so if that inspires you in some way, please share this episode. If you want, like, subscribe, share, whatever, do all the stuff. It means the world to me to get this message and get these guests that I have out there. And if you're interested in any of the book recommendations or looking up other episodes, the movie list, you can visit my website, chriskiefer.com, for all the details on the show. And also check out the Boolean review software, as well as the Boolean automation consulting company that I own for home service businesses. So thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next episode.